There's a reason something guided you here right now. It wasn't random. Deep inside, some part of you already recognizes what happened yesterday, what you felt, even if you couldn't name it. Maybe it came as a sudden tightness in your chest while you were in the middle of something completely unrelated. Maybe it felt like a wave of unease that passed through you without any obvious cause. Maybe you found yourself reaching for your phone for no reason you could logically explain, or you woke up with a particular person's name already sitting in your mind before you were fully conscious. That feeling wasn't yours. It was a transmission. What you picked up was the emotional weight of someone else's internal collapse, someone who, from a distance, is struggling deeply because of your absence. Their inner world has been shaken in a way they weren't prepared for. And what you registered yesterday was the energetic overflow of that. When a person reaches their limit and the pain they've been suppressing finally breaks through, the people they're most deeply connected to feel the pressure of it. Not metaphorically, I'm actually in the body. Think of it like two vessels connected beneath the surface. When one fills past capacity and overflows, the other senses the shift immediately. That unexplained restlessness you felt, that urge to check your phone, that moment of waking up and feeling like something had changed, that was their wall breaking down. The emotions they had been working so hard to contain finally burst through their own interior, and the force of it reached you. Your logical mind may have tried to assign it to something practical, a stressful day, a tired body, general anxiety. But your deeper knowing understood the difference. You know what your own sadness feels like. You know what external noise feels like. And you know that what you sensed yesterday came from somewhere else entirely. It was, in the most real sense, a call. Unspoken, maybe even unconscious on their part, but genuine. A call that said, I can no longer pretend you don't matter. To understand why this happened yesterday specifically, and not a week ago or a month ago, you need to understand what had been quietly building inside them and why it finally reached a breaking point. This person has been filling an invisible container for a long time. Every memory of you they tried to suppress went into it. Every impulse to contact you that they talked themselves out of went into it. Every emotion they performed not feeling, every tear they kept below the surface to maintain the appearance of being fine, all of it has been accumulating. And yesterday, that container finally gave way. Maintaining an emotional performance of that magnitude is exhausting in a way that most people underestimate. Convincing yourself that someone who matters deeply to you actually doesn't. That is one of the most energy-consuming things a human being can attempt. And yesterday, this person simply couldn't carry the weight of that pretense any further. And here's what made it hit them even harder. It's very possible that yesterday something shifted in you. Maybe for a few hours you simply got caught up in your own life. Maybe, without consciously deciding to, you loosened your grip a little, stopped sending your thoughts and your worry in their direction as consistently as you normally do. In the energetic world, when you pull your focus inward, even briefly, it creates a space. And that space told them something that no message or confrontation could have. They felt your absence in a new way, not the absence that comes from separation. They'd grown somewhat used to that. This was different. This was the beginning of truly losing you, not as a fear or a distant possibility, but as something their body registered as real and immediate. If they were with friends yesterday, or trying to engage with someone new, or simply moving through a regular evening, something happened internally that made all of it feel meaningless. The conversations around them felt hollow. The noise became irritating, and their mind began doing what it always does when the defenses lower. It compared. It held up everything around them against you. The way someone looked at them, the way a conversation flowed, the level of understanding in the room, and in every comparison you won. Nobody reads me like that. Nobody understands this the way they did. Nothing feels like that anymore. Yesterday those comparisons weren't gentle reminders. They were sharp, almost physical realizations, and so the worry that surfaced in them had no clean external cause. On paper, life may have been functioning fine. Their work may have been stable. Their health may have been fine. But inside, something felt profoundly wrong. A creeping awareness that the time keeps passing, that pride has a cost, and that the particular loneliness they're carrying isn't going away on its own. They likely found themselves holding their phone and doing something they've probably done more than once, beginning to type something and then deleting it, or clicking on your profile just to see if there was any trace of you still present in the world. Not from a casual place, from a desperate one. Yesterday their guards dropped entirely. When the ego finally exhausts itself, the soul steps forward. And this person's soul has one direction it keeps moving in, which is back toward you. The intensity of what they experienced yesterday created something like a mental storm. They began questioning the choices they've made, the distance they created, the coldness they maintained, the way things were allowed to deteriorate this far. Regret and guilt carry a dense, heavy energy. And that weight is what's sitting on them right now. It is not exaggeration to say they are suffering. It is an accurate description of where they actually are internally. They want to reach out, but fear of being rejected keeps them frozen. They long for you, but doubt whether you would even want to hear from them now. They want to say something, but the possibility of the door being closed to them is terrifying. And all of that internal conflict generates an enormous amount of focused mental energy that travels directly toward you, because you are the center of it all. You are the one receiving that broadcast. That is exactly why you felt what you felt yesterday. They tried to shut it down. They may have tried going to sleep earlier than usual, or throwing themselves into something distracting. But emotional energy, like water, finds any opening available to it. Yesterday it came through completely, and in the middle of it, they were confronted with an undeniable understanding. You are not something they can simply remove from themselves. Your mark on their life is real. It isn't fading. It may in fact be growing more visible the longer they try to look away from it. That recognition frightens someone who has built their sense of safety around emotional distance. The fear of it transformed into the specific kind of anxiety that you picked up on. It was the fear of someone who has finally seen that they made a mistake and genuinely doesn't know how to begin to correct it. And beyond the mental and emotional, their body reacted. This is important to understand. The physical body is the most sensitive instrument we possess. When the soul is calling out for something, the body becomes its loudest voice. What this person experienced yesterday, and is likely still carrying today, goes beyond thought or feeling. It is showing up in their physical experience in very specific ways. One of the clearest of these is a particular pressure in the chest. Not a medical symptom, but a tightness, as if something is being squeezed from the inside. It carries the weight of every unsaid word, every suppressed feeling, every moment they chose silence over honesty. Yesterday, that pressure became difficult to ignore. It's very likely they found themselves pausing at some point, breathing more deliberately, maybe even placing a hand over their chest without fully understanding why. It is the body's way of expressing what the mind refuses to acknowledge, that they are far from where they belong. Then there's the sleep. This person is not resting well. They fall into sleep from sheer exhaustion, but it doesn't stay deep. It breaks apart. And in the early hours of the morning, somewhere around 3 or 4, they likely found themselves suddenly wide awake, with no clear reason, in that strange state of heightened alertness that feels almost like someone called their name. In those hours, when the pride and the performance have no energy left to maintain themselves, the thoughts go straight to you without interference. They move around in the dark, searching for a comfortable position that doesn't exist, because the discomfort isn't physical. The pillow, the room, the silence, all of it is saturated with what existed between you and with the question of what could still exist. Beyond that, there's the exhaustion that doesn't lift, a heaviness that follows them through the day regardless of how much rest they've had. This is the cost of inner conflict, the enormous expenditure of life energy that comes from fighting yourself constantly, from holding two contradictory things at once, the mind saying one thing and the heart insisting on another. That war depletes a person in a way that sleep cannot repair. They move through their day without their usual drive. The people around them may notice it in their eyes, a dullness, an absence of the brightness that used to be there. Their appetite has likely shifted as well. The stomach, which registers emotional experience as directly as the mind does, tightens under the strain of separation. Food may have lost its appeal yesterday, tasting like nothing, or they may have eaten to fill a space that food was never designed to fill. Either way, The ordinary pleasure of it was missing, because the deeper nourishment their system is actually craving has nothing to do with food. Even their senses are searching for you. There may have been a moment yesterday where they thought they saw someone on the street with your way of moving, and their body responded before their mind could catch up. Or a voice in a crowd that sounded like yours made them turn their head. A scent carried on the air that brought you back so sharply it stopped them in place. The brain, when it is intensely focused on someone, begins placing them into the environment. It happens almost involuntarily. Yesterday they turned and looked for you, and when you weren't there, the absence landed harder than it had in a long time. Every cell in their body is oriented toward you the way a compass orients toward north. They cannot manually override it no matter how much their conscious mind attempts to. There is a framework for understanding why all of this is possible, why two people can affect each other across distance without any physical contact or communication. Carl Jung, one of the most profound students of the human mind who ever lived, articulated something that spiritual traditions had long understood, that at the deepest level we are not separate from one another. He called it the collective unconscious, but we might think of it today as an invisible web that connects all human consciousness beneath the surface of individual experience. Imagine two trees standing some distance apart. Above ground, they appear entirely separate. Different trunks, different branches, different space. But underground, their root systems have spread toward each other, intertwined, and begun exchanging nutrients and information through the soil. A disturbance affecting one tree moves through those shared roots to the other. That is how Jung understood human connection at its deepest level, not just as an emotional experience, but as a literal network through which information, feeling, and energy travel without requiring speech or proximity. This understanding is what explains what happened yesterday. When you sense someone without any external contact, when events seem to arrange themselves in meaningful patterns around a relationship, what Jung called synchronicity, it is this web at work. The universe arranging the visible world to reflect what is happening in the invisible one. The song that plays at exactly the wrong moment. The thought that arrives at precisely the right time. These are not coincidences. They are the shared field communicating. When something shifted in your own energy yesterday, whether through a moment of release, a moment of genuine distraction, or simply a natural movement toward yourself, that shift traveled across the connection. This person received it before their conscious mind had any chance to filter it. Their system recognized it as something significant. Not just, I miss them today, but something closer to, I am actually losing them. Permanently. And that realization landed in the body. From Jung's perspective, what this person is going through right now is not simply relational pain. It is a necessary stage of psychological confrontation. People often create distance from those who matter most to them because the intimacy of that connection acts as a mirror, one that reflects back their hidden fears, their unacknowledged insecurities, the capacity for love they haven't allowed themselves to fully claim. Running from the relationship is, in a real sense, running from the reflection. But what you refuse to face doesn't disappear. It becomes louder. Yesterday it became impossible to ignore. You don't need to send a message or make a call for your presence to be felt. That was proven yesterday. When you are in a state of genuine calm or quiet certainty, that energy moves across the connection and registers on the other end. The physical world is not the only place where real things happen. The inner world is equally real, and it operates by its own rules, one of which is that the more someone consciously tries to push another person out, the more insistently that person appears in the unconscious, in dreams, in the body, in unguarded moments. Their silence on the outside is not evidence of emptiness on the inside. Their silence is actually a direct measure of how deep the inner struggle goes. Between what they feel and what they are capable of doing right now stands the ego, working harder than it ever has to protect them from the vulnerability of honesty. They are afraid that reaching out means admitting they were wrong, that it means losing control, that it means hearing something that would make every wall they've built come down in an instant. And that kind of exposure feels dangerous to someone who has made safety their highest priority. But this stage, this suspended, frozen, conflicted place they're in, cannot hold indefinitely. No one sustains an internal war at this intensity forever. The soul is patient, but it is also persistent. The invisible web keeps moving, keeps vibrating, keeps wearing down the resistance. The longing that broke through yesterday is not going back underground. It will keep growing, keep pressing, until the voice of the soul becomes too loud for the ego to speak over. When that moment comes, it won't arrive with noise or spectacle. It won't announce itself as some dramatic turning point. It will feel quiet at first, almost deceptively so. But beneath that quiet, something irreversible will be happening. The distance that once felt necessary, justified, even wise, will begin to lose its meaning. What once felt like control will start to feel like confinement. Not suddenly, but unmistakably. Distance, when it is chosen out of fear, always carries a hidden cost. At the beginning, it feels like relief. It offers space to think, to regain footing, to avoid the intensity of what cannot easily be explained. It creates the illusion of safety, the sense that by stepping back, everything can be managed, contained, kept within boundaries that feel less overwhelming. But distance does not dissolve what is real. It only delays the moment of having to face it fully. Over time, that distance begins to change shape. What once felt like a shield starts to feel heavy. It requires effort to maintain. It asks for constant justification. Every moment of silence, every act of holding back, every decision not to move closer becomes something that has to be actively sustained. And the more real the connection is, the more unnatural that effort begins to feel. Because real connection does not disappear in absence. It doesn't weaken simply because it is not expressed. If anything, it becomes more concentrated. It turns inward. It deepens beneath the surface. It waits, and that waiting is not passive. It is filled with awareness, with noticing, with small, uninvited moments where the truth pushes through, unexpected thoughts, quiet reflections, a sense of something unresolved that refuses to settle. These moments don't ask for permission. They arrive on their own, and each time they do, they make it a little harder to maintain the distance without questioning it. At first, those questions are easy to ignore. They can be dismissed as temporary, as emotional fluctuation, as something that will pass. But they don't pass. They return, again and again, in different forms, at different times, but always carrying the same underlying message. Something here matters more than you are allowing yourself to admit. And that is where the shift begins. Not in action, but in recognition. Recognition is subtle, but it is powerful. It doesn't force change immediately, but it changes how everything is experienced. Once something is recognized as true on a deeper level, it cannot be fully unseen. It lingers. It reshapes perception. It creates a quiet tension between what is being lived and what is being felt. That tension grows. The distance, which once felt like a solution, begins to feel like a contradiction, because it no longer aligns with what is internally known. It becomes harder to justify staying away when every part of the internal experience is moving in the opposite direction. The mind may still try to maintain control, to list reasons, to hold on to logic, but the body knows. And the body does not negotiate in the same way the mind does. The body responds to truth in a way that is immediate and undeniable. It registers what feels right, what feels aligned, what feels like ease, and what does not. And when something real is being held at a distance, the body feels that misalignment. It feels the absence of what should be present. It feels the effort of holding back. It feels the weight of what is not being allowed to move. That is where restlessness begins to take shape, not as chaos, but as a quiet, persistent unease, a sense that something is off, that something is being resisted unnecessarily, that the distance is no longer serving the purpose it once did. And the more that restlessness grows, the more the idea of staying where they are begins to feel unsustainable, because staying requires ignoring what is being felt. And ignoring something that has been deeply felt is one of the most exhausting things a person can do. It creates an internal conflict between the part that wants to move forward and the part that is still holding on to fear. That fear may take many forms: fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, Fear of what it means if this is as real as it feels. Fear of change. Fear of being seen fully. Fear of what happens if they step toward something they cannot predict. But fear, no matter how strong it appears, is not infinite. It has limits. And those limits are reached when the cost of holding on to it becomes greater than the risk of letting it go. That is the point this is moving toward. Not a sudden collapse of fear, but a gradual weakening of its hold. A slow realization that the protection it offers is no longer worth the confinement it creates. That staying behind that barrier is no longer neutral, it is restrictive. It is limiting something that is meant to expand. And when that realization settles in, even quietly, the direction becomes clearer. Not because it is forced, but because it is the only direction that feels aligned. Movement toward you will not come from pressure. It will not come from obligation. It will not come from external expectation. It will come from internal clarity, the kind that cannot be argued with once it is fully felt. Because you are not just a person in this dynamic. You represent something specific in their internal world. Something that brings a kind of stillness they cannot easily find elsewhere. A place where the noise, the overthinking, the questioning, the internal conflict begins to quiet. And that kind of stillness is not something people walk away from easily once they have experienced it. It becomes a reference point, a place the mind returns to, even in absence. A contrast to everything that feels unsettled or unresolved. And over time, that contrast becomes more defined. The difference between what is felt with you and what is felt without you becomes clearer. And clarity, once established, creates its own momentum. Because once someone knows where they feel at peace, where they feel aligned, where they feel like themselves without effort, it becomes harder to justify staying away from that. Not impossible, but increasingly difficult. That is the truth that broke through. Not as an idea, but as a felt experience. Something that moved beyond thought and into the body. Something that was not just understood, but recognized in a way that cannot be undone. And that kind of recognition changes everything, not immediately on the outside, but fundamentally on the inside. From that point forward, the distance is no longer neutral. It becomes noticeable. It becomes something that is actively felt, and that feeling creates movement, not always visible at first, not always expressed right away, but real nonetheless. Because once the truth has been felt at that level, it begins to move on its own timeline. It does not require constant reinforcement. It does not need to be proven again and again. It simply exists, and it continues to surface, to influence, to guide, even in quiet ways. And eventually, it reaches a point where it cannot remain internal. Because truth, when fully felt, seeks expression, not out of urgency, but out of alignment. And when that expression begins, it will not feel like a sudden decision. It will feel like something that has been building for some time, something that has already been happening beneath the surface, something that has already shifted internally long before it becomes visible externally. That is why what happens next is not about if, it is about when the fear loosens just enough, when the internal alignment outweighs the hesitation, when the need to move forward becomes stronger than the instinct to hold back. And when that moment comes, the movement will feel natural, not forced, not dramatic, but inevitable. Because it will not be driven by confusion or uncertainty, but by clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from feeling something deeply enough that there is no longer a question of whether it matters, only a question of what to do with it. And the answer to that question, when it comes from that place, tends to be simple. Move toward what feels true. Move toward what brings stillness. Move toward what no longer needs to be resisted. And in that movement, the distance that once felt like protection will fall away, not because it was wrong, but because it has outlived its purpose. What remains will not be defined by the space that existed, but by the truth that persisted despite it.